Hi everyone. This video walks through completing question number 9 in the subnetting chapter, chapter 8. I know it says chapter 9 here, but just ignore that. This one walks you through how to complete a entire subnetting table for different subnets of a network that you have broken out. There is an accompanying packet tracer that you will complete once you are done with this video, but first we have to kind of break out each network. So the first thing we want to do is look at the document that you have, which I have here printed off. And the first step it wants us to do is, given an IP network 192.168.10.0, which is right here, design an IP addressing scheme, which we're used to looking at in our IP addressing table, with the following requirements. So the first subnet, or kind of like bubble that we're going to do, is subnet A, and it needs a requirement of 20 hosts. They do have to kind of give us some type of direction, so that's important for us there. In subnet B, we have 60 hosts that we need. In subnet C, 20, subnet D, 4, and subnet E, 4. Now, in this example, and in many examples, they're planning for the future. A lot of times you may not be using all of these hosts at once, but you're kind of like blocking out addresses for the future as well, because you have to think we need usable addresses, okay? Now, hopefully you've looked at the other 8 questions and the documents posted to Moodle to kind of get you familiar with subnetting, and hopefully you've also went through chapter 7, which was converting binary to decimal, because we'll be using those skills a lot today. All right, so with that information, we're going to move over okay, so I've got each subnet kind of written out here for you. Okay, so subnet A, it said we needed 20 hosts, subnet B 60, subnet C 20, subnet D 4, and subnet E 4. Now, I know they are lettered A through E, okay, but we cannot go off of that from first to last, okay? So forget even what our starting address needs to be first. We need to order these correctly, okay? And we need to order these from greatest host needed to least hosts needed. Okay, so based off that criteria, we're going to reorder these with starting with subnet B. Okay, so we're going to do subnet B first because it needs 60. We're going to do subnet A next because it needs 20. We'll do subnet C first because it has 20. Now, it doesn't matter if you do A or C first, but you do want to start with the greatest first, okay? Number 4, we're going to do subnet D, and then last we'll do subnet E, which also has 4. So you see we've reordered these from the greatest amount of hosts needed to the least, okay? So that is always what you want to start with, okay? So we have to reorder them, okay? And that'll be important because once we start subnetting these out using that starting address, we have to start with subnet B now, okay? That'll actually be subnet B, our first addresses that we're going to do, okay? So I'm going to go down a little bit. So our starting address in our example they gave us was 192.168.10.0/24. Now, because of the way our network is going to be broken out into all these different subnets, the first thing you can do is just forget this altogether, okay? Because we're going to change that. We don't even need to know really what that is, okay? So we're going to do 192.168.10.0 here. And remember, we're going to start with subnet B first, okay? So everything we're going to do here below this mark is for subnet B. So we're going to start with this address here. So we're going to do 192.168.10.0, okay? And if anybody remembers, that is our network address. And if you also remember, we cannot use our network address. It identifies our network, but we could not assign that to a device. Okay. Now, it says we need 60 hosts here for subnet B. That's important. We're going to start with our formula. Our formula is always 2 to the n minus 2. Okay, so 2 to the n minus 2. This n exponent here, we're looking for a number to substitute in there so that this is the result of the formula. Result should be equal or just greater than, and I mean slightly greater than 60 hosts, okay, or whatever host you need. This one just happens to be 60. So you can kind of like plug and play here, test out some numbers. You can start at 1 if you want to, but we're doing to see what will give us just greater than that number there. All right. So if we did 2 to the 4, right? Let's just throw one out there. That'll give us 16. Minus 2 is only 14. Okay. That will not work. So let's try something greater. So 2 to the, let's say 6 equals 64. Minus 2 equals 62. So that's just greater than, right? Now, obviously 2 to the 7 would be 128, minus 2 would be 126, but that's a little way too much over. We want to go just slightly greater than or right on the number. So 2 to the 6, okay, minus 2 equals, and that would be 64, minus 2 equals 62. Okay, so that's just greater than the amount of hosts that we need. All right, so we're going to roll with that. What that actually means is how many bits did we borrow, okay, from our starting address. So if I rewrite this, remember that we have 8 placeholders in every section. So if I draw out my placeholders, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Remember, all of them have a value. They start at 128, 64, 32, 16, 8, 4, 2, and 1. Okay? So what happens is we look at how many are we borrowing. So we start down here at the far right and start counting. So we're borrowing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, we're borrowing all 6 of those that I have a check mark under, and we're going to draw a line to the left of the one that we borrowed. So when we look at it, to the right of our line, we should have all 6 bits that we borrowed out of that last octet. And you always start at the very far right of the address. Now, technically, there are 32 because each one of these has 8 placeholders, but you always start at the very far right, okay? So we start here, okay, we borrowed those 6, and we're going to look directly to the left of this line to see what value is right there. And it happens to be 64. That number is the amount that we are incrementing by, okay? Or you can think of it as the start of your next subnet. So what happens is, remember, this is our starting address, okay? This is the start. So we're looking at where are we going to end at, okay? So if that is our start, our ending address, what I always do is there's 2 different ways you can kind of think about this. You can either think about it like adding 1 less than this number, because 0 to, and I'll show you. So the start of the next subnet, I'm just going to make a note, next subnet, because we're incremented by 64 in this last octet, is going to be 192.168.10.64. Okay, but that'll actually be the start of the next subnet, which would be A, because that's the next one we're doing, right? We want to find out where's the end of B, okay? Okay, where's the end of subnet B? So again, if we back up one address, it would be 192.168.10.63. So again, if you look at it as the start was .0 and the end is .63, you end up with 64 addresses there if you include 0. So also, again, that 64 there. You can either think about it like adding one less than that number, okay, but you don't add 64 outright to get the end, okay? So this is our broadcast address, okay? And then lastly, we're going to find out what is our subnet mask, because that's very important for that entire subnet B. How do we calculate that? Well, we look at every number to the left of that line. So we add 128 plus 64, or every value, 128 plus 64, which is 192. All right, now since we were in the last octet, that's where our number goes, and you put all 255s before it. Because we were subnetting in that fourth octet, that's where our number goes. Okay, so 255.255.255.192. Okay, and that's going to be the subnet mask of every address. Now, all of that information we can kind of start to plug in our table there. All right, so our table, I'm going to lay here for a second for subnet B. Our address range, okay, or we can do our network address, okay? It was 192.168.10.0, okay? Our broadcast address, or our end of that network, was 192.168.10.63, okay? So again, that's 64 addresses there, right? The first usable host. Now, the first usable one is 10.1. Remember, you cannot use or assign this network address to any device, nor can you assign the broadcast address. That signals the start and the end of subnet B, but you cannot assign them to a physical device. So the first usable is 10.1. The last usable would be 10.62. So literally you go 10.1, 10.2, 10.3, 10.4, 10.5, all the way till you get to 10.62 as usable addresses. Now, if you notice in our formula, when we did the 2 to the n minus 2, the reason we minus 2 is because you cannot use the network address and you can't use the broadcast address. So you have to actually minus 2 from the usable addresses that you have. So when I say a address range here, I mean the beginning and the end. So it'll go from 10.0, 192.168.10.0 through 192.168.10.63. Okay, so the address range, because you're thinking about it like all the addresses in subnet B should fall within that range. If one falls outside of that range, like for instance, .64, it will not work, okay? The subnet mask, we transfer over 255.255.255.192, okay? Now, based off of our information we had here, okay, we're good with this one. We got that one out of the way, okay? Now we need to go to subnet A. So that's where we're going to focus on next. It needs 20 hosts. Now, based off of what I did down here, remember the start of my next subnet, that's going to be subnet A. So I need to start with that address as my network address. Okay. So let's go over and do that one. So now I've got subnet A, and I need 60 hosts. So again, we're going to start with our formula, 2 to the n minus 2, to figure out how many bits do we need to borrow. Oh, I'm sorry. We do not need 60. We only need 20. I apologize. We only need 20. That would have been a big oversight. All right. So to get 20, okay, we need to look at what is, how many are we borrowing? So 2 to the what? So 2 to the 4 equals 16. That's not enough. 2 to the 5 is 32. Okay. Minus 2. So 2 to the 5 minus 2 equals 30. Okay. Now that is 10 greater than 20, but we don't really have an alternative there because if we go to 2 to the 4, it's not enough. So we stick with that right there. But we are borrowing 5 bits from our starting address. So again, we're going to look at it with our starting address here, okay, of 192.168.10.64. Now, I know that we started with 10.0 in the next one, but you got to think this cannot overlap at all with that, okay? This has to start one after subnet B ended, okay? One after subnet B ended. Subnet B ended at 10.63. This has to start at 10.64, okay? So we only borrowed 5, so we know that there are 8 placeholders in that last octet, so we're going to stay in that 4th octet, okay, because we're not going to borrow more than 8. The only time you go outside of this if you borrow more than 8. So we're going to draw out our values here. And we're borrowing 5 of them. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Draw a line. Okay. So based off of that, if we look right to the left of that line, we have a value of 32. So that means that our next subnet starts at 192.168.10.64 plus 32. If we add on to that, is 96. That's going to be the start of our next subnet, which would be our subnet C. Or you can think about it, let me add 31 addresses to 64 because you just, minus 1 from that, and the end is 95. So, all right, our network address or our start to subnet A, okay, we're working with subnet A here. Okay. Our network or starting address is going to be 192.168.10.64. Our broadcast or our end is going to be 192.168.10.95. Okay. And then our subnet mask for all of those addresses that go along with it is going to be adding 32 plus 64 plus 128, everything to the left of that line. So that ends up being, and again, we put all 255s in the octets we did not touch. We're in the 4th octet. So 32 plus 64 plus 128 is 224. Okay. Now also sometimes I will just go ahead and mention, you'll see this in slash notation. So what happens is, this is the 32nd, remember there's 32 bits here, 32nd placeholder. This is 31, this is 30, this is 29, this is 28, this is 27, this is 26, this is 25, and then so on until you get all the way down to 1, right? I'm going from right to left here across this whole address. So right to the left of this line also, okay, is this 27 here. So this subnet mask could be represented like this or slash 27. Okay. So in our previous example, we would have had a slash 26 for subnet B. All right. So these are the 3 pieces of information we need. So we can go back over to our table here. Okay. And start to fill this stuff in. .10.64 is our network address, but remember we cannot use it to assign to any device. .95 was our broadcast address. So our first usable is 10.65. Our last usable is 10.94. Okay. So now we're going to go to subnet C. And the start of our next subnet is going to be right here for C. Okay, so we're going to do subnet C. It needed 20 hosts. Okay, so we are now done with that one, and we're going to C. So subnet C, we're going to start with our formula, 2 to the n minus 2. Now you may have noticed something. They both needed 20, A and C. So we're going to borrow the same amount. 2 to the 5 minus 2 equals 30. Okay, so our starting address, remember, was 192.168.10.96 for subnet C. Remember, they do not have any overlap between the subnets. Okay, 128, 64, 32, 16, 8, 4, 2, and 1. We borrowed 5. Draw a line to the left of that fifth one. So when we look back, we should see 5 borrowed to the right. Okay. So we're incrementing by here. So our next subnet, which will be subnet D, will be 192.168.10. And you add 32 to 96 and get 128. Okay, that's going to be the start of our next subnet, which is going to be deep. We'll come back to that in a second. Okay. All right, so that was looking at that number. So our network address or our start is going to be 192.168.10.96. Our broadcast or end is going to be 192.168.10 dot, and we're going to back up one from that, so it'll be 127, and our subnet mask is going to be 255.255, and we're still in that last octet, so we're going to add 32 plus 64 plus 128, so you notice that it will still be 224 or /27, because remember, this is your 32nd 0, 31st 30th, 29th 28th 27. So we'll look to that. Now that subnet mask, if you've noticed, is very important. That subnet mask tells you how big your range of your network is. So when you put a address here, like let's say you assign something 10.97, okay, and you put this subnet mask with it, it automatically can tell how big your network is. That subnet mask tells you that your network spans 32 addresses because of how you add these numbers together to get that 224, okay? So that subnet mask is very, very important. So using this, we're going to fill out subnet C. So our subnet mask was 255.255.255.224 or /27. Our starting address was 192.168.10.96. Our broadcast or end was .127. Our first usable .97. Our last usable that you can assign to a device is 126. Okay, so you start to see this pattern of, you know, this network goes from 0 to 63. This one goes from 64 to 95, 96 to 127. So there is no overlap between them. Yes, they can have, it isn't anything that
has to be unique here. These have to be unique. And remember, you cannot assign the network address to any device. You cannot assign the broadcast address. So all the usable ones are in between. Okay? So if we look at where we are now,
Boom. We're done with 3. So now we're going to the last 2, which will be subnet D and subnet E. Okay. So I'm going to get another piece of paper. Okay. Subnet D needs 4 hosts. Okay. So if we start with our formula, 2 to the n minus 2. How many do we need to borrow to get just greater than 4? Well, 2 to the 2 is 4, but once you minus the 2, you don't have enough because it drops it back down to 2. So you actually have to do 2 to the 3 minus 2, which equals 6. Okay, so don't forget to minus that 2 because it can get you in trouble if you do forget. So our last, our 7, so we're going to pick up here with
192.168.10.128. Okay. And we need to borrow 3, so we know there's 8 in that last octet. So we always start with the right there. Don't want to forget our values down here for each one. So we only need to borrow 3, so we're going to do 1, 2, 3. Draw a line to the left of that. So that means we're incrementing by 8. So the start of our next subnet is going to be 192.168.10. And you just add 8 to 128, which would be 136. Okay, so that'll be, again, here will be subnet E. We'll hold off on that. We'll come back to it. Okay, so our network address, or our start, 192.168.10.128. Our broadcast, or our end, 192.168.10.135. Okay, because it's got to be 1 before that. And then our subnet mask is add all the numbers to the left of that line. So 128 plus 64 is 192, plus 32 is 224, plus 16 is 240, plus 8 is 248. So we put all 255s and all the subnets we are not doing, or the octets we are not subnetting in. We're in the 4th one. And then this last octet here is, sorry about that, is going to be 248. Or if we do it in slash notation, remember this is your 32nd 0, 31st, 30th, 29. So it'll be or slash 29. Okay. So if we look at our other page over here for subnet D, okay, we're filling it in here. Our subnet mask is 255.255.255.248 or slash 29. Our network address, .128. Our broadcast, our end, is .135. Our first usable is .129. And our last usable is .134. Okay? So again, don't get in the habit of making the mistake of, if we're incrementing by 8, we start at 128, the end is not 136, okay? It's 135, because if you do it, you got, you need 8 addresses, right? So you got 128, 129, 130, 131, 132, 133, 134, 135. If you're counting fingers, that's 8, okay? Now, all right, that's subnet D. So if we look at our paper here, boom, we're done with subnet D, and we only got one left to do, which is subnet E. And it shouldn't be too different for us because we already have a lot of the information, like the 4 hosts, how many we're borrowing, etc., is going to be the same. So 2 to the n minus 2, we should be borrowing the same, which was 3 equals 6. Okay, so that's just greater than 4. So our address for this start, dot 136, okay, 128, 64, 32, 16, 8, 4, 2, 1. Okay, so we're going to borrow 3 again. 1, 2, 3. Draw a line. We're incrementing by 8. So that means if we had a next start, we don't have another one, but if we had a next start of our next subnet here, it would be 192.168.10. And we're going to add 8 to 136, so it would be 144. Now we don't have one, but that's okay. So our starting address, or our network, is 192.168.10.136. Our broadcast, or our end, is 192.168.10. And it'll be one previous to that, so 143. Again, 136, 137, 138, 139, 140, 141, 142, 143 are all 8 addresses that we need. Okay, and then lastly, a subnet mask should be the same as the previous one, because we add everything to the left of that line. Dot 248 or slash 29, because remember this is our 32nd, 0, 31st, 30th, 29th. Okay. So if we fill that in on our chart, lastly, we've got 255.255.255.248 or slash 29, 192.168.10.136 was my starting, or my network. 143 was my broadcast, so that makes my first usable .10.137, and my last usable .10.142. Okay. Now, at this point, I'm going to kind of show you what the addressing should be, but you should also go over to our packet tracer video at this point, okay, and complete the packet tracer part, because these are the instructions for it. So you're going to cable the devices, PC1 to switch 1, switch 1's G01 to router 1's G00, switch 2's G01 to router 1's G01, and connect PC2 to switch 1, okay? I'm sorry, let's just say switch 2. Connect PC2 to switch 2. That would be a little difficult there. All right, so the left side of the router, we're going to assign devices to addresses in subnet A. So we're actually going to go back to our first subnet that we got, all right, and assign the first usable host in subnet A to PC1, okay? So if we look, all right, in A, PC1 is going to be our first usable. So right here, this should be the address you use for PC1, okay? It also says that right here, assign the gateway the last usable address. Now remember, the gateway is the router. So on the router, this should be R1. It should be its G00 interface, okay? So G00. Okay. Subnet B is going to be the other one that we're using, okay? So right here, this one is going to be PC2's address,
This one is going to be R1's G01 address. Okay. So keep that in mind. Note that, and you can now switch over to our other video for how to actually complete this and put all this addressing for subnet A and B in our packet tracer file. If you have any further questions on subnetting, please let me know. And there's plenty of also other great resourceful videos on YouTube as well.